Um, you say in the one hand, employees will not tolerate, and yet, sadly, we're seeing an awful lot of people in the gig economy who are on very minimal wages, not treated particularly well, and it's not a lifestyle choice, to use a political phrase recently. And we live in a world where increasingly we're trying to standardize and streamline and commoditize and use technology to establish that. And that seems almost the antithesis of what you're saying about effectively being an artisan and valuing the human, what they can bring. It's a real difference. I mean, in the Industrial Revolution, we saw people move from cottage industries into factory towns. We're now seeing almost the opposite. You can now work from home, and you don't need to have a factory when you have the technology at home. I mean, how do you see that balance, and what do you think? How do you think things will evolve? You know, because the global economy has been pretty successful for a lot of people, um, but not all.
Not by a long way. I think if we look, the concept of a 9 to 5 is a construct of the time when we didn't have lighting to operate outside of normal working hours.
Mm.
So, I mean, I think the fact that for many a year we all fought through the same traffic to get to the same place at an hour of 9 o'clock and then left at 9. And indeed, for the majority of that time, we're asked to park a vast majority of our own life at the door and then pick it up again at 5 o'clock and off we
Mm.
went, I think is the part I think that has fundamentally changed. In the business that I work in, and why not? The vast majority of people that we have working want to do a far better job than probably the targets we set for them. They are
Mhm.
personally motivated to achieve and be better, as most humans are, every single day to be slightly better. So why sort of handcuff them around?
Mhm.
Well, you can't do that. Are you going to be a better person if actually you can pick your children up and drop them off at school? Are you actually going to be better if you can set the way that you work
Mhm.
to suit your needs and know that you're not going to be judged as a result of it? Are you going to feel better if you can bring ideas to the table, irrespective of your supposed seniority within an organization? Then I would say absolutely.
Mhm.
So I think, yes, within the gig economy, it's given a lot of flexibility, but I think you can still have that flexibility within a corporate construct that, gives you the best of both worlds, arguably.
I'm interested in what has led to that mindset which you have now. You speak as a really good CEO that, frankly, I'd love to work for. But were you always like this? Were you a precocious, egalitarian, socialist 10-year-old? I mean, how have your views changed with your experience over time?
Um, I think I'm not sure what I was like as a 10-year-old, but certainly not socialist. Um, I think, through experience, I've experienced periods of pretty poor mental health over the last, well, probably for most of my life. And, having in a good place now relatively gives you a sort of ability to sort of reflect back on that. And I think, the corporate world that I grew up in, which, I started my career age 16 straight into banking. So that would have been 1991,
Mhm.
has changed massively to
Mhm.
where we are now. Alcohol was a very large part of that culture, as it was in the island.
Mhm.
Um, you were at your desk, you know, and if you wanted to get ahead, you'd be at your desk longer,
Mhm.
you know. Um, so I think I've reflected back onto how I used to work and think about life and prioritize and realize that actually, you know, as an employer now and as a leader, the people that I have working with me are more than qualified to do what they're doing,
Mhm.
and actually giving them the freedom to
Mhm.
work as they want to work and to bring their home life into work, if they wish to.
Mhm.
Um, is something that I probably would have benefited myself from throughout that career.
Mm-hmm.
Actually being asked how I was, during that period, having people listen, having the agency to send up a flare and not fear it was going to end my career, which was probably more of an internal my perception of what would have happened than actually what would have happened. But I think even during those periods, the way that we talk about well-being now, I think is still a very long way away from where it probably should be.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite akin now to the ESG and environmental. We've got about well-being washing, where it's like, well, it's fine. We're very well-being focused. We've got a fruit basket and a massage week, and we've got all these proactive things. But actually, we've still got some pretty toxic work cultures. But it's a little bit harder to actually eke those out. So we're just going to focus on the fruit basket. Thank you. So I think, yeah, just as I've developed and learned the hard way of how I don't want to do. I mean, we're still a business. We still have to answer to shareholders. We still have to be profitable. We still have to continue. So this is not a free ride for anyone who wants to come along and say, well, thank you very much. I'm going to sit here, take a salary and do nothing. There are still consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But the consequences I look at of underperformance is more the consequences of the community and the team. That
Mm-hmm.
actually an underperforming cog in that wheel is letting down the rest of the business, is
Mm-hmm.
actually impacting outcomes for the other employees that rely upon the income generators, who rely upon the business development people, who rely upon the business still existing to a Simon Sinek infinite game methodology
Mm-hmm.
in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, a decade. So I think that's where it's come through a fair amount of learned experience and probably the confidence to start again in a new employer 3 years ago at Evelyn Partners, where I didn't have to adjust in degrees from where I was previously. And the Matt that joined that business 15 years ago, I could start again and be somewhat different in how I approached work and indeed management.
One of the things you touched on is the fact that you are lucky to have talented employees, and I'm sure that's not luck. I'm sure that's by good recruitment and process. I mean, how is the world going to be for talented employees when, for example, increasingly a lot of the cognitive functions are going to go with AI, and the non-cognitive, the sort of physical functions, well, we already have robotics for that. Okay. What are the talents that are worthy of an employer's dollar or pounds into the future? Because there's this great thought that all these jobs will vaporize, but we'll all become computer programmers.
Mm.
Actually, as somebody who does an awful lot of work on technology, I can tell you one decent programmer can do an awful lot of work. And so, take, for example, fund management. You may have had many, many accountants before. Not all of them need to be programmers to write a fund management system.
Yeah.
How do you see the world changing?
I think from technological revolutions and industrial, we've always been told that this new technological, from the printing press through to the washing machine through to the car, is going to make a vast swathes of the population redundant, and we'll end up in needing to just be fulfilled in different ways and find ways. I don't believe that's the case. I think there will still always need to be the community aspect of personal interaction in businesses, and therefore we will find that individuals will, as you efficiently remove the need to do X role, you will fly into and float into something else and find another function within that. I think even as much as working from home has given individuals options, I still want people to be in the office on a regular basis to have those interactions, which, if we look at actually working from home and online meetings like as this, they become a little bit of an AI sort of construct of we're going to talk about this today and this is what we're going to talk about. And the meeting's got a heading and I can see it at the top of the screen and that's it. Or actually some of the best conversations happen when you bump into someone in the kitchen and it reminds you of something. So I think as much as AI will improve the things that we think it will improve, that still involves us telling it to improve those things.
Mm-hmm.
The human interaction, either be it internally, or be it with our clients, or be it with the community at large, is still a fundamental part of, of us living and working. So I think in many ways, AI will free up more time
Mm-hmm.
to do those bits that computers can't do, or
Mm-hmm.
programs and algorithms won't do because we haven't told them to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree with that. I think my mild concern, and I certainly see the benefits of AI, and I'm sure like everybody watching this use it quite a lot as well.
Mm,
But I read recently something about, it was a letter read by Stephen Fry, written by somebody else, saying that we almost lose a little bit of our humanity, a little bit of our soul when we outsource everything. And maybe that AI produces something perfect in terms of a letter, a poem, a script, a song, a video, this.
mm,
And it will do it perfectly. But actually, maybe the soul is the sum of all our little imperfections, the little quirks, the coughs, the sneezes,
mm.
the casual conversation in the kitchen. Um, this concept of a soul is not something that anyone really has talked about since the 1930s and 1940s. We may
Mm,
talk about the self quite a lot, or
mm.
possibly even persona, but never really the soul. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the soul has got, very strong connections with religion,
Mm-hmm.
but arguably we go back to identity in a sense of self. That is, it's your essence, it's your that bit inside you that it's the gut feel that directs you in, takes one path or the other. It's
Mm-hmm.
that piece around it. I think that quite rightly, what we're seeing now is elements of soul with the script writers dispute we've seen in the US. You know is there an existential debate about whether do I care if I laugh if it's been written by a computer or if it's been written by a human? And I think maybe the consumers will end up sort of deciding. Maybe you'll end up with Netflix have to put up on their things this script has been written by a computer, and then the consumer will decide on whether they care that much about it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it is an incredibly deep debate about what ends up being better, and it comes down to your own personal choice.
Mm-hmm.
You can either decide you wish to eat organically because of you believe the benefits of that, or you can eat something that is highly processed. Sometimes that's not a choice. Sometimes that is a pure financial reality for very large parts of society.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, that as always, when things are coming out and they're new,
Mm-hmm.
there is a very extreme version of where they could get to.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reality tends to be far more moderate in terms of what they deliver. And it's within our control. If we don't want that to be a reality, then we should be able to adjust it right now and stop that being the
Mm-hmm.
case.
I wonder to what extent this current generation, in part because of COVID and new working patterns, etc., is one that's trying to find its own soul. We talked earlier about this idea of identity and this feeling of belonging.
Mm,
Um, we didn't talk explicitly about outrage, but there's a lot of people that will feel offense at one thing or another.
mm,
And certainly in business, there's an awful lot that's in pursuit of a purpose, something that will galvanize and align. I'm just interested in the soul from that perspective, both as an individual and as a collective. One of the things that you've been involved in is psychedelics. Has that changed your mind on the soul?
literally and metaphorically. I think, yeah, I mean, from my interest in mental health and mental health outcomes, I mean, I think it's not so much the soul. I think it is still very much for me a scientific conversation around, how how we form neural pathways, how our experiences build the person that we are, positively and negatively, how psychedelics can, in theory, offer a reset button and allow new neural pathways to form far more effectively than in other ways. So I think that sort of, so I think, we are obsessed now, I think, as a society with identity. I can't remember prior to the last sort of 5 years desperately searching for what my identity was, growing up as a into teenage years going, what is my identity? What is it? I need to know what it is right now. And arguably it's a little bit like trying to catch a cloud. It escapes. Your identity is something that forms gradually over time. It's not something you can, like Mr. Ben, walk into the shopkeeper, slip on, try out, and then drop again, especially in a world where that identity becomes a fact, becomes an online record of what you believed and what you said. And how many people in society find themselves in a new position, and then suddenly a comment they made 10 years prior is pulled out of the online archives. So I think that becomes very different. So I think identity is something that forms over time. It's something that really only is unique to us internally, as opposed, and again, as we go back to the sort of the starting questions, we don't really have the luxury of defining what others identify us as. That's their job, that's their call, that's their right, essentially. And it can be completely counter to how we think we identify and we portray ourselves.
You are very articulate, very polished. I mean, all your thoughts are very well articulated. There's
Thank
no
you.
ums and ahs. I suspect because you've done similar stuff many times before. You're a very popular man and sought by media a lot. Is there anything in this conversation that has sparked a new thought in you?
Well, I mean, that I don't think of myself as a polished individual by a long way. I where I find myself right now is it is comfortable because it's something I'm choosing to do, but it's not something I ever thought and have actively strode to actually make myself this way. I tend to speak about the things that I'm passionate about and speak to people I like speaking to. So actually, maybe I'm just narrowing that down into areas where I'm actually got some confidence around that. So yeah, I mean, but certainly through this conversation, a lot of things have sparked and given me cause to think. We've talked about, identity. We've talked about AI. We've talked about the soul, that sort of meshing of the religious, theological into the sort of the more practical. I come from having been Catholic educated, in a home that was in some ways Church of England, but not practicing, to dropping a lot of that in my life, to marrying a wonderful woman who has been brought up with a very strong Catholic upbringing, to my children finding themselves at Catholic school. And I think what it just strikes me back is, if you step back from what it is, the belief, it's the community aspect, I think, of church, the common belief of believing in something. I think is what we're all striving for to a degree. When you go back to purpose, when you go back to identity, it's what do I identify as? Well, I identify as a Catholic. That's part of my identity, and it's a very strong part, because then the rest of the world knows to a degree what you believe in. What drives you, what's your common values, your core values, your ethics. I think so. That's important. So yeah, there's been a lot of things that, as we've gone through and discussed, and I will continue to ruminate on for long after this. So yeah.
One last question then. Okay. Depending on how technology evolves, this is something that may be part of your immortality, because there's every possibility that this will live on longer than both of us. If you were doing a message to the world, what would be your immortal message to hold in perpetuity?
Wow, that certainly picks up my own idea of my own self-importance. I think one of the things that I've been sort of thinking quite a lot about is about empathy, and how to a certain degree, the world has become unempathetic towards others' views, towards trying to not polarize people into good and evil, bad. Most recently we've had, I was lucky enough to be asked to be on a panel for White Ribbon Day, and there was, the recent violence against women and girls report has been released, and I think it takes a strength of character to sort of step back and look at people empathetically, even if they are doing the most abhorrent things, and try and ask yourself a question, why? So I think when it comes down to a world that finds itself increasingly polarized between your views on this and your belief on that, and how you might identify and what you might think, I think what it comes down to to focusing on the empathy to enable everyone to just be who they want to be. And that, I think, is, God, if anyone is desperate enough to Google Matt Falla in 20 years' time, its empathy is something I believe that is lacking in society.
Matt, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And I think that is a perfect closing message. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.